Hello. Hello, everybody. It's poetry time. I want to welcome you all to today's PoetryMic. We have two wonderful readers with us today, but before I introduce our first one, I will introduce myself and then tell you what else is going to be happening soon in the poetry realm. My name is Georgia Court. I'm the proprietor here and a lover of poetry. So that's why we do so much of it here, because I'm the boss and I get to say, we do poetry. So here we are, right? So, all right, the next poetry event that we're doing, as far as open mics and so forth, is December 8th at noon. That's a true open mic. So we're alternating every other month between our traditional local mic, which is where we invite particular poets like today, and true open mics, where anyone who comes, you just sign up day of and you get to read a poem. So December 8th is a true open mic. So if you are a poet or thinking about becoming a poet, come for that and read some work and invite your friends to do that. The other poetry event that's happening quite soon is on November 13th, our poetry book club led by Doug Knowlton, and Doug is in the back. Wave your hands, Doug. He leads our poetry book clubs, and the book that we've been reading for this month is Grace Notes by Naomi Shihab Nye. Oh, there, Bubba has a copy of it. And Naomi is an absolutely terrific poet and terrific human being. She has been here in Sarasota for us for one of our poetry events. And if you have not read her work, I would really highly recommend it. So November 13th, 2 p.m., Doug leads it right here, and the books would be for sale downstairs. And likewise, just to give you a heads up, John Foster, who will be our first reader, has a book of poetry for sale, and that's also available downstairs. So once you've heard him read, I imagine you're going to want to get down there, buy a book, and have him sign it. So don't forget to do that. Okay, I'm going to introduce our first poet, John Foster, who was educated at Yale, Middlebury College, and the Sorbonne. He taught French at private secondary schools in the Northeast, Choate and Emma Willard schools, and served as department head. He also organized homestay programs in France for his students. He's a national poetry judge and member of the Florida State Poetry Association. He's the author of 4 collections, the last of which is called A Gesture of Words. That's the one that's for sale downstairs. And that has been endorsed by former Florida Poet Laureate Peter Meinke, who has also read here multiple times and is a real friend of the store, and of Doug's, who's back there. And Peter Meinke has endorsed it as a useful guide for aspiring poets. So with that, I welcome John Foster. Enjoy his reading.
Thank you so much, Georgia. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah.
And by way of introduction, I'm reminded of the story of the first grade teacher who had explained to her class of youngsters that Milton the poet was blind. And the next day in class, she turns to little Johnny and she says, "Johnny, can you explain to the class what Milton's great affliction was?" And Johnny says, "Yes, and he was a poet." you might say that's been my great affliction ever since I can remember. I've always felt that poetry can be so much more than rhyming stanzas and free verse. So in an effort to expand the horizons of my readers, I've put together a guide to more than 30 forms of poetry, which Georgia has referred to, and the title is A Gesture of Words, Poetry Forms, and Formulas. My selections today are from my book, and represent a wide variety of poetry. We'll begin with one of my favorite forms, the French rondeau, that wondrous vehicle which allowed the poet John McCrae to express his memorable In Flanders Fields. The rondeau is a verse of 15 lines consisting of 3 stanzas, a stanza of 4 lines, a quintet, a quatrain, a quintet, and a sestet, a stanza of 6 lines. And the rondeau has 2 rhymes only. Lines 5 and 15 are short and form a refrain consisting of a phrase taken from line 1. All other lines are the same metrical length, and I call this one In High Regard. Consider this. Consider taking pride in lowly tasks, for when you do decide to prize their worth, you may well come to know esteem of self, the seeds of which will grow, a benefit that cannot be denied. Respect of others too can be implied as you espouse this ethic for your guide. A menial job's worth doing well, you know. Consider this. One might clean sewers where the rats abide and rarely see the light of day outside. Though for this work there seems not much to show, a lonely life of toil down below might truly be considered dignified. Consider this. There are many forms of syllabic verse. Haiku and nonet are perhaps the most well-known. I particularly like the 3-line senryu, a cousin of the Japanese haiku. As many of you know, Western forms of the haiku and senryu contain 17 syllables arranged in a 5-7-5 line pattern. The essential difference between these 2 forms is that while the haiku relate to Mother Nature, the senryu speak to human nature and can often be humorous. Here is a series of 3 short 3-line senryu, a senryu suite, so to speak. Unlike haiku, senryu may be titled. Indecision. My uncertainty. Is it a good or bad thing? Can't make up my mind. Marital judgment. I never question my wife's judgment. After all, look whom she married. Redundancy. Needless repeating is needless, like déjà vu, all over again. Flog. Once known as witchcraft, men cursed beat the ground with sticks. Today it's called golf. A new dance, the political. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then a side step. Precise advice. I've told you millions and millions of times never to exaggerate. Vocal. Man evolved language primarily because of a need to complain. Oh, fudge. Mix sugar, cocoa, butter, walnuts, and you get terminal acne. Clotheslines. Camouflage trousers on my shopping list to buy. Couldn't find any. Circles. Some politicians may have 2 oars in water, but both on same side. Kindling. Should I put fire into all my poetry? No, quite the reverse. Writer's caveats. Remember 2 things. Avoid cliches like the plague. Never use never. A form we don't often encounter is blank verse. Simply put, blank verse is unrhymed lines written in iambic pentameter. Thus, each line has a regular cadence of da-da, 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 da-da. This one is called Encounter. She strides across the lobby's inlaid floor, her silvered hair and elegant attire attracting glances from the hotel staff, and me, who's nonchalantly sitting there, the day's newspaper fallen to my lap. She pauses now to speak to the concierge, then nods and glides directly past my chair. A drift of perfume lifts my eyes again to glimpse a slightly wrinkled, ringless hand address her brow. She stops. I wonder why. She's older than she looks, I speculate. A well-dressed patron of the arts, perhaps. About my age as well. How interesting. And unattached, as I can plainly see. No doubt she's here to book a room or suite, or bring complaints to management's front desk. Is that annoyance on her face I see? Did anger stop her in her tracks before she would confront the reservationist? A word announced, or was it a request? I cannot overhear from where I sit, but see the manager appear at once and then present her with an envelope, while taking pains to point me out to her. She turns directly, heading straight my way, and takes the vacant chair set next to mine. Her perfume once again takes charge of me, and so I smile and fantasize anew. The briefest glance at me is all she gives. Then opening the envelope, she spreads a document upon the table there, and with an urgency and yet with care, she reads and then begins to fill an application for a chambermaid. Many poetry forms, such as the villanelle and the pantoum and the triolet, use line repetition. I particularly like the triolet. It's a rhyming verse of 8 lines in which line 1, 4, and 7 are identical, and lines 1 and the final line is identical. This arrangement creates a kind of rhythmic musicality with its refrain-like repetitions. In fact, the earliest triolet were written as devotionals to be chanted in churches and monasteries. This triolet is called Christmas Eve. Where voices now rejoice in song and echo through the night, we join the festive sing-along. Where voices now rejoice in song, with carols is where we belong. A fellowship by candlelight, where voices now rejoice in song and echo through the night. Lest you think that my book contains form poetry only, I do offer some free verse. This free verse poem is called Legacy Lost. And then I paused and turned for one last look. The family farm, once a Winslow Homer painting of proud permanence, had caved. 3 generations, I of the 4th would no longer till, nor plant, nor harvest here, nor die here. Forebears had staked a claim, worked it, stoned it, owned it. My claim, hollow as the empty barn, the Winslow Homer cracked and peeling, unfit even for auction, now chatteled to a bank. I glanced back at the great oak, its wisps of Spanish moss floating in the wind like clusters of hands waving goodbye. I wanted to turn back the clock. One of the most familiar forms of poetry is the Shakespeare sonnet, a 14-line poem consisting of 3 quatrains and a concluding couplet. It was not invented by Shakespeare, by the way, but named for him because he was his most famous practitioner. As most of you know, it has a prescribed rhyme scheme. Many sonnets have a love theme, like this one, which I call A Light Touch. She chooses from her sexy lingerie a filmy, lacy number just for him. She slips it on, the essence of risque, and slides into their bed. The lights grow dim. Her husband's hands explore beneath the sheets. his palms descending with increasing verve. She now begins to shiver as she greets his glancing touch, exciting every nerve. The softest moan beseeches from her lips as searching fingers further down then drop and brush along her tantalizing hips. He stops. She pleads, "Oh, honey, please don't stop." "Hey, why'd you quit?" Her voice a puzzled note. His calm reply, "I found it, the remote." While I was stationed in the Air Force in Spain many years ago, I had the opportunity to witness my first bullfight. At the time, it was an institution revered by most Spaniards who looked upon the ceremony with an almost religious fervor. And I was caught up in all of that. And I wrote the following poem, which I call Matador. Trumpet fanfare, a crystalline pasodoble quiets the roar of a fevered plaza. Ritual call to worship. Expectant eyes turn to savor black muscle now released into the chute. Brutish blur of bull. A gasping senorita crosses herself as aficionados rise at once in homage to the breeding. The corrida has begun with prayer, parade, and pomp, an afternoon of poetry and peril. Amid the practice dance of picadors and banderilleros, a lithe movement of gilded brocade, an arch of spine and brow, a silken agility in his suit of lights. El torero emerges to execute a bow, then sweeping passes, inserting his own breathless choreography. Fearless swirls of magenta balletic panache, rising olays fill the ring as maestro turns the bull, learns the bull, and with an anchored Veronica, spurns the bull. Barbed and beaten down at last with mutilated artistry, its fury bent and spent, the once proud animal stands bowed, predestined. A sword poised, the crowd flash frozen in a hush. The moment violent, vulnerable, merciful, triumphant, like any fine poetry worthy of an ear. As many of you know, ballads are narrative poems which possess a musical quality. The core structure of a ballad is the four-line stanza or quatrain. Ballads are often written in iambic meter, which adds a sense of flow and musical cadence. This ballad is entitled Echo. Slow-stepping sure to dirge of drum, there reeds a grieving moan. Proud clansmen march to richest hum of bass and treble drone. With every swell of ruddy cheek, bereavement bleats a tone of woeful news, of anguish bleak. They've lost one of their own. The highlands' heathered hills resound in haunting harmony, mid mourners aching to the sound, a daunting elegy. In regimental file they march, their chanters at full tilt, parading neath the graveyard's arch in splendid vest and kilt. To slowest beat the column plays in reverential pride. The band now turns its solemn gaze to countrymen's graveside. Sky's soaring hymn, majestic knell salutes one of the clan. It echoes still in distant dell their tribute to this man. To conclude my presentation, I would like to share with you a poem which has been published in our local newspaper numerous times on the occasion of the anniversary of 9/11. It is entitled Exeunt, a tribute to 9/11. Emerging dazed and ashen like stricken miners from a nightmare tunnel, they lurch into the gray soot of mid-morning. Coughed up from a cauldron of imminent collapse, trembling in unison with the ground, they flee the surreal horror. Zombies choking in a snowstorm. A blouse torn away, a glimpse of blistered skin, bruised lips beseeching a cell phone. A dark suit staggers, clutching a scorched briefcase, necktie askew like his eyes. Rage of traffic down and out, unimagined hysteria. Blur of yellow slickers works against the tide, putting caution aside for the sake of humanity. Heroes are born and die. Against a cerulean sky, two symbols of America have been cleft and left in agony, their wounds belching fire, spewing terror, rattling death. Like the mantle of ash below, a shroud of screams cloaks the streets, screams not only from ground zero, but from above. Above the street survivors, above the din of meltdown, above all of the above, what remains? It is an indelible hurt, a violation, a tragically defining moment in our nation's history, a moment to be remembered in sorrow for victims and in tribute to courage and sacrifice, a moment to be mourned today and always. Thank you. I want to thank Georgia for including me in today's program, and thank you for your attention. My book is available for sale after the event.
Okay.
Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you, and I'll pull this over.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I got it.
You got everything, John?
Well, let's give John a round of applause. That was an absolutely terrific reading, and I really appreciate your coming to be with us. Our next and final reader is Michael Riley. He has lived in Bradenton, Florida for 3 years. He was born and raised in Burlington, Connecticut, where he developed a love of stories at a young age, especially those pertaining to the fantastical. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit kicked off what would be an unquenchable thirst for getting lost within worlds of the grand and the seemingly impossible. Since he became interested in poetry, authors like Lewis Carroll, Edward Lear, Robert Frost, and many more have been constant sources of inspiration for him to push himself and have fun while doing so. Please welcome Michael Riley. Would you like the microphone here or?
Yeah, let's do it like that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, you are welcome.
Hi guys, my name is Michael. Thank you, Georgia, for allowing myself and John to come up today. And John, thank you for speaking and reading. You definitely have a teacher's way about you, so that was awesome. I guess brief little introduction. I'm 29. 20th of December, I'll be turning 30, so it's a little horrifying, but hey, maybe it'll never come. It will. I've been writing poetry probably a little under 2 years now. In school where I used to attend, they taught us poetry in school, and I always thought it was very boring. At the time, I liked fantasy and stories, and it just was very dry to me. A couple years ago, I found poetry for the first time, and it just wowed me. And so I've experimented with a lot of different styles and moods and manners and all sorts of things. I can't stop writing it, but I figure I'll start with something a little bit lighter, and then I'll go with something, I suppose, a little bit more on the serious side. But the first poem is called The Boy with the Sideways Brain. Alfred Alfonso was quite the odd boy, a sure fact of life if you knew him. A boat and a bottle, his favorite toy, he had fashioned one day on a whim. When others would sit with their heads on the couch, his head would be square in the floor. Where other kids might be discouraged to slouch, he needed to slouch a bit more. Alfred once asked of his mother outside, "Can we join the geese for a dip?" When told that they couldn't, he artfully tried to convince them to join in his trip. His left was his right, for him up was down, and he spoke out the alphabet backwards. Convinced that a verb was in truth but a noun, he replaced the word running with blackbird. Alfred Alfonso, AA to his friends, knew all of the tricks of the trade. The trade being how to dismantle a pen and find what the pieces each weighed. He could name all the presidents throughout the years by the color of socks that they wore. He also arranged them in separate tiers by how well they assembled their s'mores. Instead of cartoons, Alfred liked to watch MASH, because he and the star shared initials. Both because they both were quite bold and assuredly brash, and pretended to neutralize missiles. Hourglass Alfred was what he was called when his relatives came into town. Both because he was one who unbearably stalled, and because he would sit upside down. Some children dreamt of exploring the cosmos. Others imagined home runs. By 6, Alfred saved up enough money, almost, to purchase a stake in the sun. Wanda Alfonso, young Alfred's good mother, had given him sage-like advice. Equity in the moon might not recover, but the sun would be well worth its price. Known for his excellent spatial awareness, Alfred knew just how to frame any room with a subtle and elegant spareness, while not feeling overly tame. Pets were a part of the Alfonso household. In fact, there were 3 worth a mention: a koala named Tim, a hamster named Leopold, and a scaredy cat named Apprehension. Alfred's father was often away on the job, that job being horse relocation. His work for the government dealt with the mob, giving ponies new names and vocations. Yes, Alfred deserves to be noted whenever the topic at hand is children who would have been quickly outvoted on offers to be in command. 3 cheers are in order, though, for the fine lad about whom such a tale has been told. Perhaps you may think me confoundingly mad, but the truth I can only uphold. And if ever you meet him, just keep this in mind: he's probably older and wiser. Then again, Alfred is tricky to find. He now serves as a Penguins advisor. This next one is, I took one of Aesop's fables and I adapted it into a poem. I've done that with a couple of them, but this one is the most recent. It's about the Aesop fable, The Oak and the Reeds. In wild north winds, green and wide, where none but creatures stray, a brook as crystal ran with pride, o'er rocks by sand and clay. O mighty oak, rooted steadfast, overlooked this picture, whose noble form could storms outlast, proving as the victor. Along the bank, yet in the brook, were thin and untold reeds. A baited breeze their structure shook and bent them low with speed. One day in spring which brought a gale, the oak stood constant through. He told the reeds, a sadder tale than this I've seen but few. Wind, rain, and lightning's fury, all of these I weather. But you poor reeds have cause, surely, for lament and measure. Not an hour passes in which from my base and branches I do not see you toss and pitch during wind-swept dances. And the reeds continued on amidst themselves a pensive tune. One, however, this thought dismissed, his words devised and hewn. Save your pity, friend, we gladly yield before the wind's will. Pride in such a place would sadly foolish endings fulfill. I say this, who is as one who has stood nearby you for some time. All of your arms and strengthened wood can't save your fate's consign. Gale turned to tempest while they spoke. The north wind came himself. The reeds knelt down and proud the oak braced, counting roots as wealth. Once and twice the oak rebuffed him, laughing as he did so. Blue in the face, expression grim, the north wind charged his foe. As one struck down before a king, the oak fell, found no peer. The reeds around began to sing then songs he would not hear. Somber songs which called on heaven, lifting up their neighbor. Drifting branches rose like leaven, gone back to their maker. Wild northlands still were wild, brooks still ran as crystal. Reeds still sang their songs and smiled, delicate and brittle. That was really awesome, the way you tied the in-between parts between your poems. I don't quite have that, but that being said, this next one is called The Highs and the Lows. Yesterday my temper was a hurricane within me. In the morning, yes, this morning, I rest in tranquility. Jesus knew my form before I twinkled in the eyes of both my mother and my father. Jesus had me for a prize. Days like yesterday don't bring much confidence to bear that I was anything except prepared for disrepair. Nothing could be further from the truth, this thing I know. Yet where else can I set my thoughts when furious wind whips and blows? Whips within me, whips outside, whips around beloved ones. I let the wind whip at its crest until the wind is done. And now I think back on last night and wonder who that was that cursed God's name into that wind, angry just because. The me who hasn't yet become the final fullest man. I'll be when God's good work is done, that's who that was and who I am. Today I have no answers. Tomorrow's skyline I can't see. But this morning, yes, this morning, I'll rest in tranquility. I've got two more. This next one, I mean, I've got a million, but I've prepared beforehand. This one I actually wrote yesterday morning, and just seemed appropriate for the time, and just wanted to share this one. It's called Still Standing. I woke to find the world still turning, no great flood, nor buildings burning. Ice and fire had not yet extinguished daybreak's silhouette. I wondered if perhaps then I, alone today, was meant to die. A morbid thought, and still a fear which by my bedside waited near. But hours passed, my pulse went on, and hummed its common steady song. A thought upon my heart did touch, and said, I love you so, so much. This thought persisted right along, anxiety which felt so strong. I saw a picture of the light, and darkness clashing at such height. Above the world a shadow swung, a coal-black blade, and forward sprung, towards a figure draped in robes, of pure light pulsing like a strobe. The blade was malice born and bred. The shadow clothed itself with dread. The light was patient, and his choice response was this, a still small voice. I love you, Michael, so, so much. I saw the shadow grasp and clutch at air as if some binding force held fast the creature at its source. And then I saw the picture change. I with the light did words exchange. I'll be okay, I asked the light. His eyes were flame, his hair was white. Once more I heard the words, I love you. Then I came again to view my room which held a heart that beat, those words of love still on repeat. I woke to find the world still turning, no great flood, nor buildings burning. Ice and fire had not yet extinguished daybreak's silhouette. And this last one is the only one that I have that does not rhyme, but it's, of all of these, probably the most nearest and dearest to my heart of hearts. And it's just simply titled Mom. I dreamt about my mom several days past. Nothing terribly profound. No tears were spilled when I saw her face again. No urgent warning to see the doctor earlier than she had. I mentioned how odd it was that we both had partially webbed toes. Maybe that's partly why I like ducks as much as I do. Long-lost cousins or something to that effect. All those nights plagued by nightmares unspoken. Mornings awoken by shouting, shrieking, or flailing. But then, just like that, I was 6-year-old Michael again, talking to my mom about our toes. Glad as a goose, happy as a clam, just happy.
Thank you, Michael. And let's give Michael another round of applause. Very interesting, creative. Thank you so much. Now, does anyone have a question or a comment or anything you'd like to say to or about to the poets or about the poems that you heard today? Any?
I love that last one especially. That was beautiful.
Could you speak up so that everyone can hear you?
I'm sorry, I'm like talking to him.
Yes, right, right.
That last poem, titled Mum, was just absolutely touching and musical and so personal, which I think showed and what made it so beautiful. I loved it. Thank you.
Yeah, other comments or questions of the poets, anything like that? Yeah, over here.
I have one for the first one, and I'm sorry I actually tried to get here sooner to hear you, but I write poetry myself, and I'm wondering how you get in the mindset to write poetry for children. Do you have grandchildren, children?
I don't hear him.
He's wondering, and I'll repeat the question anyway, which is a good idea.
Yeah.
He's saying he writes poetry himself, but he's wondering how one gets into the mindset to write poetry for children or grandchildren. And do you have any comments on that?
Writing for a particular audience. I personally have no personal experience in writing poems for children, so I really can't answer your question directly. But if I were to consider doing that, I would want to become a child and kind of think about what would be fun for me to hear. That's basically how I would go about it, I think.
Sounds like good advice from somebody who knows how to write poetry. Yeah, over here, yeah.
Yes, John, do you have a specific writing practice
practice that you write daily or whatever?
The question is, does John have a specific writing practice?
That's a good question. I'm really not a creature of habit. I wait for an inspiration. One of the things that keeps me going is that I am a member of the New River Poets, which is a chapter of the Florida State Poets Association. We meet monthly. And every month there is a challenge for us to write a poem about a specific topic and bring it to the next meeting for critiques. So that keeps me writing at least one poem a month. I used to write a good many more. I don't write quite as much anymore, but I really look forward to those challenge poems, which the New River Poets always like to do, and we take turns issuing a challenge. The next challenge is why I write poetry.
Other comments, questions? Anything from anyone? Well, if not, thank you for coming. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to thank you for having poets here and promoting poetry because not enough people do. So thank you, Georgia.
Thank you for that comment. Poetry is me. I love poetry. That's my thing. So I'm so glad that you all have come today, and please come for other events, poetry events, but also other things. There's always something going on here at the bookstore. So thank you for coming.
Good.
Thank you again.